in the trailer for Top Gun Maverick, you see a lot of fighter jets, and you see a very small clip of a homoerotic volleyball scene. So, I mean, they checked all the boxes. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. You can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. You can also like us on Facebook, facebook.com/thenerdspodcast. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. And finally, you can follow us on Letterboxd, which is basically just social media for watching movies. You can review and rate any movie that you've seen recently. My account is at The Nerds Podcast. My co-host is at That Tyler Hunt. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, That Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am pretty good, man. How are you?
It's been a weird week, a super, super weird week. So right after we recorded, I had to go to the ER to get an ultrasound. Turns out, thankfully, I'm not pregnant. So there's good news right there. But it wasn't because we were recording. It wasn't like, I kind of phrased it like I went to the ER because we had a super intense episode. I really enjoyed our episode last week. I think it was probably one of our best episodes recently. But that wasn't the reason. I had some issues that I'd been kind of dealing with the week prior. And by dealing with, I mean, I was just ignoring like men usually do. I hate going to the doctor, so I was just kind of ignoring it. But it got real bad after we were done recording. And so I had to end up going to the hospital. And so I've been on new medication. It's been kind of making me a little sick. And so it's been an interesting week, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm surprised you led with that. I mean, off recording, I knew what was going on. You texted me last week, but I didn't think that that's something you'd bring up. Obviously, you didn't get into details, but I'm glad you're feeling better. Yeah, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, I'm pretty open book, especially on the podcast. So that was something that had been going on in my life. I'm not obviously going to get into it further, what actually is going on, but I just thought I would mention that. It also kind of ties into the next thing that I wanted to talk about.
Real quick, before you go into your next thing, just so everybody knows, you're fine. Like, you're not dying or anything. The way that we're sidestepping what happened makes it sound like you have like a few months to live. So
No. I did have to call into work on Monday, though, and that is a big deal for me. Anybody that knows me personally is I don't miss work. Like, I got perfect attendance last year. Like, it's a pretty big deal for me to call into work. So yeah, I had to do that. I was actually supposed to call in Tuesday as well, doctor's orders, but I was just like, you don't know what you're talking about, doctor. And so I still went in on Tuesday. But yeah, I'm gonna be fine. I'm just taking new meds, and it's been interesting. But what I wanted to talk about, and what we talked a little bit about last episode, is the fact that you were going to make me go see Men in Black International again. And I had every intention of doing that Sunday after we were done recording. And obviously I wasn't able to do that. So I was like, okay, well, it's still showing until Thursday. And so I bought a ticket on Thursday, like right after I got off work. I was going to go. I kind of got hung up a little at work that day. And so I was getting into my car to like leave the parking lot at like 3:50. And the movie started at 4. But as I've talked about before, previews at AMC have been ridiculous lately. They're like 23 minutes. And I see so many movies that I don't really care about seeing the same fucking trailer 20 times. So I usually just kind of time it out where I'm like getting in my seat at the theater like a couple of minutes before the actual movie starts. So I wasn't too concerned about that, but like 30 minutes from where I'm working is like the bare minimum for me to get there and be able to get like my drink and everything and sit down before the movie starts. And I know that you would have never let me hear the end of it if I missed part of this fucking movie. So I was like, okay, I'm going to barely make it. But as I was pulling out of the parking lot, my wife texted me. I think I mentioned this in passing, like really quickly, that we just adopted a kitten. He's like 10 weeks old. And so he likes to bolt. So we've kind of had to be careful, like when we open the doors and stuff, like outside, letting the dogs out or whatever, because he likes to bolt. So my wife texted me and she's like, yeah, I can't find the cat. Like, I'm freaking out. I can't find the cat. And so I was like, fuck. So I started driving home, and I got most of the way home, and she texted me. She's like, oh, I went into the garage a couple hours ago, and I guess he followed me, and I didn't realize he was behind me. So I shut him in the garage for a couple hours, which he was, of course, okay about that. But I had already like wasted any time that I could have wasted getting to this movie, so I had to cancel that. And apparently, that was literally the last showing at AMC forever. Like, the 4:00 showing on Thursday was the last showing, which kind of makes sense because The Lion King is like basically taken over AMC. Like, there was like 6 or 7 theaters that were showing that movie when we went and saw it on Friday. Like, we literally couldn't even go see it on Thursday because by the time I went to buy our tickets, all of the showings that were going to work out for us on Thursday night were completely sold out. So we had to actually get a ticket on Friday, which was kind of weird for us because we usually see these big movies on Thursday. But anyways, I guess I will have to go see it at a regular theater. Like, I'll actually have to pay for it. And so I had to go do that yesterday. And I sent Tyler the picture of my ticket because apparently I'm not trustworthy at all. Like, he can't just take my word that I went and gone and went and saw this movie again. I actually went and saw it with a buddy from work. And I was like really nervous because I hadn't seen a movie with him before. And so I was like, I really don't want to watch this movie with him and then him be like, oh yeah, that movie was awesome. Like, it was kind of a trial run for him and me going to see movies together, because if he liked Men in Black International, I was like, we can't be friends anymore. That's how much I fucking hated this movie. It's so much worse on the second time around. Because the first time around, you still have hope for it. Maybe it'll get better. But I know where this movie is going on the second time around. It was never going to get better. It's so boring. It has nothing going for it whatsoever. I knew exactly where this movie was going. So I just knew that there was certain scenes that I had to get through. And I was just like, okay, I can check that one off the box. We're done with that one. And so I knew I had like, okay, I have like 45 minutes left in this movie. Okay, we're done with the RZA stuff. I can check that off my box. And I was literally just watching it thinking, how much more of this shit do I have to get through?
Well, I'm glad that it went that way, because obviously this is supposed to be a punishment. And I think part of the fun of this one was the fact that you had to scurry around to go see it. Because yeah. I was not super happy that I had to pick Men in Black for you to go see again, but there was just nothing else in July, honestly, that kind of fit the bill for this punishment for losing the Rotten Tomatoes film draft bet. So, yeah, I'm glad it was a pain in the ass. That's how it's supposed to be. So
yeah, and it was kind of weird because I went to the theater, a theater I haven't been to in a long-ass time, basically since I canceled MoviePass like 2 years ago and signed up for AMC A-List. I had not been to this theater since then, and the parking lot was completely full, and I was like, there's no way that there was this many people to see Men in Black International. But of course it was for The Lion King, which I'm sure is just like printing money right now.
Yeah, I haven't paid attention to actual box office results for this weekend yet, but I know it was tracking for like 150 million opening.
Yeah.
The only part of the box office that I did track, and I guess I could have thrown this into Nerd News, was that Endgame looks to be passing Avatar. Like, they officially published it last night. Like, a bunch of people involved with Endgame put it on their Instagram or tweeted it out. I think that they mentioned it at the Hall H Marvel panel, which of course we're going to get into in Nerd News. But yeah, I guess Endgame finally passed it.
I was under the impression that it wasn't going to, not just because of what we talked about a few weeks ago when I went and saw the re-release, but with Lion King coming out this week, I was hearing a lot of stuff that it basically wasn't going to pass it, that it was going to be super, super close, but it wasn't actually going to pass it. So I guess it must have done better than at least the people that I was reading thought it was going to.
Yeah, I read all sorts of articles too saying that it didn't or it wasn't going to. There was no way. It didn't look like it could. So I don't know what happened, but I'm happy. I mean, we spoke about it a few weeks ago. Like, Avatar's fine, I guess. It's not a movie that I particularly enjoy and, watch on repeat or anything. But, Avengers Endgame is such a culmination of so much. It's pretty cool that it gets to sit on the throne as the highest grossing movie globally ever.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this a little bit. The fact that Endgame is the culmination of this huge cinematic universe that we've literally never seen before in the history of cinema, and it is going to barely beat this movie that came out of literally nowhere. I mean, of course, Avatar had the whole technology thing going for it, like the way that it was filmed and all that stuff, and it was before a lot of these other movies that kind of have followed it, like the Rise of the Planet of the Apes and all that stuff, like the motion capture technology really didn't. I mean, you had Lord of the Rings for sure, and you had other movies before it, but it took it to this whole new level, and so it had that going for it. But the fact that it literally an original property, and you can make an argument of how original it really was, but like it's not based on anything. The fact that it made so much money, and that a movie like this barely is going to knock it off is pretty amazing, even though, again, we're not super fans of that movie.
Yeah, I'd be curious to dig into what really happened with that movie and why it made so much money. I think that the 3D aspect was huge at the time, and 3D is not as big as it was. It's kind of fallen away, and those tickets cost more money than regular movies. I mean, I know that whenever I saw it in IMAX 3D. So it cost, it cost me, $18 to $20 at the time to go see that movie, whereas a regular 2D ticket at that time was probably $8 or $9. So it was almost like double what I would be paying typically. So I think that may have had something to do with it. But yeah, I'd be curious to dig in. I really don't like that movie. The more I think about it, as much as I like the Avatar stuff at Disney World, it's a ripoff of not. I don't want to say it's a ripoff, but it's a story that's been done quite a few times in different ways, and you just put blue cats in it. Like I just don't get the appeal, and I think that when the sequels come out, they are not going to make near as much money as that original did. And people are gonna be curious as to why, and I just think that it was a flash in the pan, and people don't care about Avatar anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you brought up a really good point. Is one of the reasons why I was pretty into this movie when it first came out. I was obsessed with it. I would go almost as far as to say that I was obsessed with it when it first came out. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when I first saw it, I saw it in IMAX 3D, and it looked amazing. And then literally every time I've seen it since, I'm just like, nah, this movie's all right.
Yeah, I've not watched it since that initial viewing. So maybe I'm being too hard on it, and I should watch it again, and I'm sure I will before the sequels come out. But I guess you got to give it to James Cameron. He made it this movie-going event. I guess it's not a movie that you sit at home and watch. It's something that you had to experience in theaters and 3D and IMAX. So he did that, and I think that that's probably why it made so much money.
Oh yeah, 100%. And kind of piggybacking off what I just said, but I was obsessed with this movie, like I said, and I bought it when it first came out, and then like a year later, or maybe not, wasn't even that long after it first came out, they re-released it with like all the deleted scenes and stuff, and so it was like basically made like a 2.5 hour movie, like over 3 hours, and I rebought Avatar. That's how much I liked this movie originally. And then I was watching the re-release for the first time, and I was like, I don't really like this movie that much. Like I was literally regretting my purchase of rebuying this movie.
Yeah, I actually own the extended edition, and I don't think I ever watched it.
It's not worth it, man.
I'm sure I will before the sequel. When does Avatar 2 come out? Is it next year or the year after?
I thought they just got pushed back.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, I know he's legitimately working on them now.
Yeah.
So it looks like, okay, so 2021 is when it comes out. So Jesus, I mean, that's still 2 years away. When did the original Avatar come out? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I don't know the exact date, and I probably should, because
Okay.
my wife and I had just started dating. Like that was one of the first. I think it was like the last thing that we did before I went away for a while, because my parents used to live in Las Vegas. My dad still lives in Las Vegas, and so I was like, it was right before summer, like we were getting out of school for summer, and it was like one of the last things that we did together. So I probably should know that date, but I don't.
So luckily, in the world of IMDb, I can look it up really quick. It's 2009. So the sequel to this movie is coming out 12 years later. And then I'm sure I knew this, and I'm sure we've talked about it in the Nerd News, but it's funny because when you search Avatar on IMDb, you see Avatar 2, 2021, Avatar 3, 2023, Avatar 4, 2025, and Avatar 5, 2027.
I will be really surprised if they make the last two. Because I think, aren't they filming, haven't they already filmed the second and third one? But they haven't done 4 and 5 yet. I thought that they were filming them back to back.
Yeah, I thought that they were as well. That's why they're going to release them every 2 years. But I have no idea on what's been completed and what hasn't.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if we saw 4 and 5.
I just think 2's going to come out, and it's going to not do near the business. And by the time you get to 3 or 4, nobody's going to be interested.
For sure. We have talked about Avatar way too fucking long. We haven't even jumped into the actual episode yet. So let's go ahead. If this is your first episode, we do not normally talk about Avatar for this long. We usually start off these episodes by kind of just checking in with each other. We don't get to have these nerdy conversations as often as we'd like. So this first segment we just call What We're Into. So what are you into this week?
So I binge watched The Chef Show with my wife earlier this week. So
Okay.
Yeah, if you're unaware, this is kind of a cooking show on Netflix. It features Jon Favreau and Roy Choi. So Favreau is obviously the famous director, and we'll be talking about his most recent movie in our main topic. And then Roy Choi is a famous chef that rose to prominence with his food truck in LA a long time ago, and he's become fairly renowned. So the story is that these two became friends during the making of the movie Chef, which Favreau, of course, wrote, directed, and starred in. And then Roy Choi was there to be kind of like the expert on set. And I guess he also taught Favreau a lot during the filming. And it was one of those things where they became friends, but after work ended, they kind of went their separate ways and wanted to eventually get back together and do something together creatively. So this show was kind of their platform to do that. So there is this master/apprentice type relationship between the two, and it's kind of cool to watch, especially on Favreau's part, because he's a very curious person and he's very eager to learn more while he gets to spend time with Roy. So it's kind of like you're learning these tips about cooking through the eyes of Jon Favreau, and as he asks questions, it's kind of the same questions you would ask. So I really did like that aspect of the show. So the show's a pretty easy watch. It's 10 30-minute episodes, so it's an easy investment. At its heart, like I mentioned, it is a cooking show, but it's a cooking show that also kind of becomes an interview format show at sometimes, and it's also in this weird way kind of a deep dive on creativity. So most episodes feature someone in the kitchen with the two that I just mentioned. So notable names that appear in a few episodes are Gwyneth Paltrow, Bill Burr is in there. They visit Robert Rodriguez in Austin, Texas at one point, and they cook in his kitchen at his home, which is a really cool episode. And then there's this episode where I think they're in Atlanta, probably whenever they were filming something Avengers or Marvel related, and they do this round table dinner featuring those two, Robert Downey Jr., Tom Holland, the Russo brothers, and Kevin Feige, which is a pretty cool scene, obviously, for a Marvel fan. I will say the show itself is a little outdated because I think it was filmed in like 2017, or at least that's what I picked up on as they kind of talked about what was going on currently as they filmed. So I guess it's a project, whereas Favreau was making Lion King, this was almost like his side hobby that took a lot of time to complete. But it is a pretty cool show with a lot of cool personalities. I will say that Roy Choi is somebody I wasn't super familiar with, and he kind of has an ego that shows through a little bit on the show. And then there's I think there's 1 or 2 episodes with David Chang, who's also a well-known chef that's kind of a dick. So he has a Netflix show that I think I've talked about on the podcast called Ugly Delicious that I tried to watch, but I couldn't stick with it because of his personality. So his episodes kind of lost me. And I'm definitely not saying that all chefs are dicks. There's an episode with 2 LA chefs, one that's a baker and one that specializes in Thai food, and both women are super sweet. So it's definitely not a chef thing. It's just a thing with those 2 guys in particular that I didn't really like. But yeah, I mean, to kind of sum things up and kind of get into the real reason I like this show so much is because I've always been somewhat interested in cooking. I enjoy making meals, and shows like this always inspire me to learn more about cooking. I'm not a hugely creative person, but I like making things and doing things that people can consume, which is probably part of the reason I started this podcast with you. But the cool thing about cooking is you create something and then people like literally consume it, and hopefully they enjoy it. So I think in another life, I would have liked to have been a chef, but to live vicariously through shows like this definitely does the job.
All I took from everything that you just said is that Asian chefs are dicks.
Yeah, that's not what I mean at all.
I just really wanted to put you in an awkward place on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not stereotyping anyone, but David Chang and Roy Choi both seem to kind of be dicks. I don't know them in real life. Maybe it's their show personality, but that's not true, because the female chef that I talked about that specialized in Thai food was super, super sweet and a very nice lady on the show, and she was Asian. So I was not stereotyping.
Asian male chefs are dicks.
I wish I watched other shows with Asian male chefs and I could say, oh, no, they're not all dicks, but those 2 are. So that's all I can go off of.
Yeah, so I'd never watched the movie. We kind of talked about this off recording. I kind of got into my own head about the movie because I had heard a lot of people like, if you're hungry, don't watch this movie. And so I would get in my own head and I just never watched the movie, even though I've heard really, really good things about the movie. But the show itself, could never get into it. My wife watched, I think, the first couple episodes, and Gwyneth Paltrow was on, I think, the first episode, and I cannot stand her. Like, just listening to her talk makes me want to punch her in the stupid fucking face. She's like the worst, which I, of course, would never do, but she's like a terrible person. Like, how do you not know you're in Spider-Man Homecoming, you stupid bitch?
So what you basically just did is you made me out to hate male Asian chefs, and you beat women. So that's where we're at with things. But yeah, that I don't know that episode was a great episode to lead with, because Gwyneth Paltrow, I mean, she was there to promote Goop, and they bring Goop up quite a bit. Ugh. But yeah, you're right. One of the big scenes, and like I think it was even reported on sites like comicbook.com, was Jon Favreau and Gwyneth Paltrow get into this conversation where he's talking about how he made something on set, and it was on the set of Spider-Man Homecoming, and she's like, oh, I wasn't in Spider-Man, I was in Avengers. And she doesn't realize that she was in fucking Homecoming. And he's like explaining the scene that she's in, and it's just not ringing a bell. So we kind of had this conversation before we started recording, but to me, that just shows how little she fucking cares at this point.
Yeah, I don't particularly like her as a person because of Goop. Like, she literally has multiple lawsuits, people suing her for selling basically shit to them, like not actual shit, of course, but just like lying to people that it does this one thing when it basically doesn't. There's no proof that it does anything, but that's a whole different thing. But then for you to be an actress and not even know that you are in this thing that we love, as fans, we all know that the actors and actresses in things don't care about the properties as much as we as fans care about them. Some of them do, probably, but for the most part, this is their job, and they probably have to compartmentalize a lot of that stuff. But to not even fucking know that you were in the movie just proves to me that it was just a paycheck for you, and that you were just checking off a box on your contract, and you really don't care about these things that we care a lot about.
Yeah, I'd imagine she's the type of person that just shows up on set and regurgitates lines and bails. Like no creative investment
100%.
at this point. So anyways, what are you into, man?
I am into I Love You, Now Die, which is another true crime documentary. I feel like I'm legally obligated to talk about the next big one that comes out every time one comes out, because it seems like I can't go like without a month without talking about one. So this particular one is a 2-part HBO docu-series that discusses the case of Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy, who were teenagers who were in a long-distance relationship. Conrad was depressed and suicidal, so Michelle encouraged him via text messages and phone calls to kill himself. And then when it was found out her involvement in his suicide, she was charged with manslaughter. And I remember hearing about this case a few years ago, and it really blew up via the media, because the media, as much as I kind of consume pop culture, and I do enjoy like reading about stuff like this, the media does kind of like eat this kind of shit up to a certain extent that is pretty unhealthy. And so it doesn't really necessarily surprise me that a story like this really, really blew up. But if you just take this story at face value, it's still a really interesting case. A girlfriend convinced her boyfriend to kill himself, but legally, like when you get into the legality of this case, it's very, very interesting, and it sets a weird precedent. Like, at what point are you legally obligated as a person if you tell somebody to do something illegal and they actually do it? Like, how much are you legally obligated? And so, as a legal nerd, I thought that was pretty interesting. A lot of that stuff, this documentary gets into a lot of the legality of what she did and why she was able, essentially, and spoiler alert, she does get convicted of manslaughter, but it goes into a lot of I mean, it's not just, you can't just take this case on face value, because there's a lot of other things that go into it, but it definitely sets this weird precedent. Like, what can you say to people now, and what can you be essentially accused of because of what you say to people? So to kind of get into the case in more particulars, Michelle had her own issues. She had an eating disorder. She was suicidal herself. Conrad was depressed. He was on medication. He went to therapy, and he was suicidal. Like, he had attempted it before his final attempt. And so it was always, like, when I heard about this case beforehand, it was always kind of played up in the media like that she's the villain for doing this. And I think that this documentary does a really good job of kind of presenting it, not necessarily in a neutral light, but they present, like, one episode presents the prosecution's case and one episode presents the defense's case, and you get a wider vision of what actually happened. Because, like I said, she was kind of portrayed, from what I heard before I watched this documentary, as the villain, and she's not a good person. Don't get me wrong, like, I don't feel sorry for her. She's definitely a very disturbed person, but she had her own issues. And the more I watched this documentary, the more I was convinced that it was just unfortunate that these two people that were both very disturbed kind of met at the worst time in each other's lives. Like, you would just think, if you were taking it at face value, that she's this fucking monster, which she's not a good person. But the more I watched this, the more I don't want to say thought she was more sympathetic, but I could kind of see what happened, and you can kind of see the relationship kind of evolving into this really fucked up thing that it eventually became. And what kind of makes it even shittier for these two people was the fact that they were both really disturbed, and then they were also in this long-term or long-distance relationship, which I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I've been in a long-distance relationship, and it certainly doesn't help. Like, even if you don't have the problems that these two had, like, being in a long-distance relationship just sucks. So the fact that they were teenagers, they both had their issues, and they also had this other thing that they were trying to do. It was the worst possible situation for the two of them. And on a personal note, it was super, super weird to watch this, because a lot of the documentary, because most of their relationship happened via text messages and phone calls, I think they said a couple of times throughout the documentary that they had only met in person like 5 times over the course of their relationship. So most of, like, I would say 90% of their relationship evolved via phone calls and text messages. And so a lot of the documentary was just screenshots of their conversations back and forth, and they were super emotional teenagers, and so said some weird ass shit to each other. Like, they even mentioned that Michelle was like obsessed with Glee, and so she would like send quotes from Glee to Conrad, and it was super awkward. And I was just like, I felt like I was like a pervert, like reading these teenagers' text messages between each other. It was just really awkward. Like, if you had this regular relationship and this were to happen, there's not like this transcript of everything that happened. But because it was this long distance relationship, we literally have a transcript of their relationship. And it's pretty fucked up to watch it. But it was a super interesting case. And I think that any true crime nerd like I am would really enjoy it.
Yeah, I haven't heard of this documentary, which, I mean, you said it's pretty popular, so that's surprising that it kind of slipped under my radar, but it sounds interesting, so I think that it's something I'll probably watch.
Yeah, and it's a pretty quick watch. I know why they decided to break it up into 2 episodes, because like I said, the first episode is really kind of, the first like 15-20 minutes is kind of giving you background information and kind of introducing the main players in the case. But then the rest of that episode is really just kind of laying out the prosecution's case. And then the second episode is laying out the defense's case. And then at the end of that, the last like 20-30 minutes of that is kind of the aftermath of what happens after the trial. And so I get why they split it up, but I think the first episode's like an hour long, almost exactly, and then the second episode is like an hour and 15 minutes. So really, if they had combined those 2 things into just like it would be basically a 2.5 hour movie. So it's not super long. I get why, again, they cut it up just because they wanted to kind of to divide those 2 things up, but it could have easily just been a feature-length film.
Yeah, interesting, man.
Yep, so that is what I'm into. What do you have for nerd news this week?
Well, it's Comic-Con weekend, so
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. I was looking, though. Honestly, not a ton of what I have is from Comic-Con, except for the Marvel stuff, which is what I'm going to end with. A lot of it was just, there were a fuck ton of trailers released this week.
Well, I thought that a lot of that had to do with Comic-Con.
I mean, potentially, but some of these trailers I remember watching on like Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to kind of go through. We'll see if you watched them or not. I did watch all the trailers I'm going to talk about. Like I said, we'll save the Marvel stuff for last, but there is a news item or 2 that I'll throw in here as well. And I do have a trailer trash, and I'm sure you can.
Oh, yeah?
I'm sure you can guess what it is if it played before Lion King like it did for me. So the first trailer that was released this week that I jotted down was The Kingsman, which is the prequel to, obviously, the Kingsman movies by Matthew Vaughn. It stars, I'm going to fuck up his name because I've never actually, I think, heard it pronounced, but Ralph Fiennes? I don't know, Voldemort. So it's a prequel to those movies where he kind of starts the Kingsman, I guess. But did you watch this trailer?
I did. I'm very intrigued by it. Normally when I hear like they're making a prequel, like I'm not super into it, but I think that they did such a good job in the first 2 movies of not giving you a ton of mythology. So I think there's enough material that they could make this interesting.
Yeah, I think that it looks pretty cool. I think that it ties just enough to the movies we've seen while looking at, I mean, honestly, completely different from those movies in a way too. So I'm excited for it. I think that it's got some legs. So the next trailer I jotted down that I wanted to bring up was 3 from Hell, which is the new Rob Zombie movie that's a sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. So you and I are both...
I did not watch that.
Yeah, so you and I are both horror fans. So I wanted to jot this down because I am not a fan of Rob Zombie, but I have seen The Devil's Rejects a few times. That movie ends with them getting murdered and getting shot.
Spoiler alert.
And like shot a lot to Freebird, which is actually a pretty cool scene. And this movie basically says they survived that, which is horseshit. And if they did survive that, all of the terrible things they did, like they would have murdered, like these people would have been, executed. So all that being said, I didn't really pick up much on the trailer. I think that Rob Zombie's not had an amazing career, and he's going back to the well with this one. So I don't know if I'll see it or not, but I did want to throw it in there because, again, it was a trailer that was released this week.
I always think it's funny. I mean, it's not necessarily funny, but like, obviously he made his mark as a musician, and he was very creepy. Like, his music was very like hard rock, and he was just kind of a creepy dude, and that's kind of how he made his mark. And I always just thought it would be funny, like, if when he started making movies, instead of just doing the stereotypical like horror, like the movie that you would expect him to make, just like him come out and make like a fucking rom-com or something. I always thought that would be kind of funny, but obviously he's not interested in doing that.
Correct. So, all right. So these next two trailers, I think, tie more so into Comic-Con. They were either released before the panel or they were released during a panel. So the first up is something that I posted to our Facebook because it has a special place in my heart, and it's something that I'm excited for, and that's Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. So you and I are both huge Kevin Smith fans, and obviously this is like his film that he made after the heart attack, and it was something that he's been trying to make for the last few years. And so he released this trailer. He had his panel last night where he talked more about the movie and announced that they are doing a tour this fall, him and Jay, and that the movie will be released as a Fathom event in October, and then a wide release will come later. So the trailer itself is fine. It's very nostalgic. I know that I like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back more than you do.
Yeah.
I think that the trailer starts off on a pretty bad note. Like, I don't know if you watched it, but I did. The joke where he says drop the plants, and Jay thinks he says drop your pants, and it's just the same joke from Clerks 2 where he has his dick tucked back. Like, that did not hit for me, and that starts the trailer. So I was like, oh shit. This is not going to be good. And I don't know that anything else in the trailer really solidified it for me, but there's so many people in this movie. I think Kevin Smith said about 44 cameos, and I was excited to see Matt Damon and Ben Affleck come back and do Kevin Smith a solid. And obviously it's been known that Chris Hemsworth's in this movie, so I do hope that there are some really funny moments throughout this movie, like in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and that it was just a case of a poorly cut trailer.
Yeah, that first scene is real fucking stupid.
Oh, yeah.
Just the whole scene is really stupid. And that was disappointing to start off a trailer like that, because obviously whoever cut that, I doubt Kevin Smith had anything to do with that, but the fact that he wrote this movie, he filmed that fucking scene, so he obviously had faith in it that it was gonna hit, and maybe it will for his general audience, but for me, I was just like, ugh, like it put a bad taste in my mouth for sure. But the rest of the trailer looked fun. I am not a huge fan of Jay and Silent Bob, like, as characters carrying their own movies. I've never been a fan of that. I think that they work really well in small doses, but I'm excited for this movie because I like all of his movies, and I like him coming back to this universe that he has built, because he's kind of, obviously he did Red State and he did Tusk, and now he was trying to do Moose Jaws, which I don't know if we're ever going to see that. So, like, he went off and kind of did these other movies, and so it's kind of cool to see him come back to his universe, but at the same time, the trailer didn't look amazing.
Yeah, so, I bought my tickets to see a Fathom event on October either 13th or 15th, so I'll get to see it then, and we'll find out.
Yeah, I was a little bit bummed because I think they're coming to that tour is coming to the Pageant, which is in St. Louis, and it's a venue that I've gone to quite a few times. It's a great venue in St. Louis. It's really easy to get through from Evansville, and so I was really excited, but I actually have a work thing that particular day, and there's no way I could get out of it. So I won't be able to take the day off to actually go to that event. So I'm pretty bummed about that.
Yeah, the closest one to me where they were actually physically going to be there was Columbus, and they're doing 2 shows in Columbus, but both of them sold out in a matter of days. So by the time I was going to pull the trigger and buy tickets, it was already sold out. So I'll have to settle for the Fathom event. Cool. So the next trailer that was released that I just watched this morning actually was for Top Gun Maverick. This is a bit embarrassing to admit, but I've never seen Top Gun.
Really?
I really don't have much interest to see Top Gun. And after watching the trailer for Top Gun Maverick, I still have zero interest in watching Top Gun. So I don't know. Maybe you can speak more to it, but I thought that it looked fine, I guess.
So I can describe Top Gun to you in a few words. So there's a lot of fighter jets.
Yeah.
And there is a homoerotic volleyball scene.
Yeah.
And that is about it. That is what it's known for.
Okay.
And in the trailer for Top Gun Maverick, you see a lot of fighter jets, and you see a very small clip of a homoerotic volleyball scene. So, I mean, they checked all the boxes.
Yeah, good, man. I don't have anything else to add. I mean, the trailer's out there if you want to watch it.
I felt weird watching that because I, like you, not a huge fan of that movie. It's all right. I've seen it a couple of times. It was on TV a lot when I was a kid, so I watched it a few times. But yeah, it's not my favorite Tom Cruise movie. So yeah, I just don't get why people love that movie so much.
Sure. Let's see. The next trailer was for a show, and it was released at Comic-Con, and that is a show that I'm assuming you're pretty interested in because you love the game, and that's the trailer for The Witcher, which is coming to Netflix. So I'm not familiar with the game. I'm not familiar with the books, but the show felt like a Game of Thrones ripoff that didn't carry much weight. So I'm not looking forward to it.
So I did not watch the trailer because, as I've made my thoughts on Henry Cavill known several times, I am not excited that he is going to be playing the main character in The Witcher. I did really, really like Witcher 3. It's probably one of the best RPGs ever made. It's a fantastic game. I did try to not really read, but I listened to the first audiobook for the Witcher series. There's quite a few books in the Witcher series, and I really just couldn't get into it. I don't know if it's just like the writing style or maybe it was the narrator. I just really had a hard time paying attention to what was going on. So maybe I just need to pick up a physical copy of that first book and try to read it because they're super, super popular. And obviously they made the video games based on that book. So yeah, I mean, I love the video games, but it may just because I love that game because it's so well put together, and maybe it's not necessarily the mythology. So I'm going to watch the show for sure, but I mean, he's just the worst. He's the worst fucking actor. He could literally, if they asked me, which of course they didn't, and they would never ask me, what's the worst person we could cast for this role? And he is going to be my number one pick every single fucking time.
I think that you're a little hard on Henry Cavill.
No.
I think that he's a charming guy, but you don't need a charming guy playing that character. I don't know that, thinking back to the trailer, I didn't retain a lot, but he doesn't speak very much. So he, I don't know, maybe he's playing the strong silent type. I don't know the character very well, but I'm sure
That's pretty much the character.
So there you go. I mean, at least he won't talk much, so you got that going for you, but I'm sure I'll watch it as well. We'll probably end up reviewing it for the podcast, I'd imagine, when it does come out. But yeah, the trailer did nothing for me. And then I have a couple stories, but I'm going to go ahead and wedge trailer trash in here right now. So trailer trash is a segment we've done very, very sporadically since we've been a podcast. But I mean, I couldn't not bring up the Cats trailer.
Oh my God. I didn't see it in front of Lion King, but I saw it because the internet basically exploded. So I watched it. Man, like, how does somebody make that movie and not realize this is the ultimate nightmare fuel?
I did not know that the internet was revolting against this trailer, that this trailer existed, until I saw it in front of the Lion King, which is probably the way to do it. If you don't know what you're getting ready to see, it fucking grabs you by the nuts, man. It is horrifying. And it is, you talk about the backlash against Sonic. Like, how do you even release this movie at this point? It looks like a fucking joke. It's so bad.
Yeah, it's just I can't even, man. I just can't even.
It turns you into a basic white girl.
Totally basic. I can't even. But it's just so bad. Yeah. I mean, I get it. Like the guy that's directing it, and I'm blanking on his name. Is like Tom. I want to say it might be Holland. Is that right?
I think it's Tom Arnold. No,
I wasn't even close.
No, I have no idea.
He's done other musicals before, so I mean, I'm sure it won't be as bad as the trailer makes it out to be. But I'm not gonna ever go see this movie, so I'll never know. But I mean, I feel like some things just need to stay as plays. Like this is obviously a super, super popular play, Broadway musical, but sometimes things just need to stay as they are. They don't need movie adaptations.
So two quick things. Yeah, the director's name is Tom Hooper.
Okay, I was pretty close.
Yeah, that's pretty close. And second thing, are you sure you're never going to go see this movie, Pat?
When does it fucking come out? God damn it.
December 20th, 2019.
Fuck. You'll find something else.
I don't know, man. I don't know that there's anything else coming out in December that could beat you having to sit through this, because, man, if the rest of if that really is what this movie's going to be, what we see in that trailer, like that's going to be the perfect way to end this punishment for you this year.
Well, then I want to retract my previous statement. I'm super excited for this. I think it looks awesome.
All right, man. So a couple stories here, and then we can get to our main topic. So the first is that it's more so just a follow-up from last week's Nerd News. So the Halloween sequels have been confirmed. They are not coming out in the same month like we talked about last week, but they are coming out in October 2020 and October 2021. Everybody's returning. Jamie Lee Curtis, David Gordon Green, Danny McBride to co-write it. And the movies are called Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. So those are coming out, which is exciting.
Yeah, and they made us look really smart because we said that there was no fucking way that they were going to be releasing the same month. And we were right. Like, I mean, they're not going to release movies like this, these big franchises. Like, they're going to milk it for all it's worth. You can't just release it like a couple of weeks apart from one another. Because, I mean, there's people, not us, like the normies, that don't go see movies right off the bat. There were still people seeing Men in Black International, which I can't even imagine, like months after it came out. And you can't do that to a franchise like this. Like, that makes no sense. So the fact that they were filming them back to back makes sense, but to like release them so close to one another doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So this makes a ton more sense than the original report that we read.
For sure, man. So I'm definitely excited for those two sequels to a very good movie. All right, so that leads us to what I consider to be the grand finale of Nerd News.
So no
this
It
week.
Trailer?
Oh yeah, I did watch that. We can talk about that. I mean, it still looks good. I don't know, man.
It's funny that I just like interrupted you. I didn't watch it. I didn't watch the It Trailer. I just assumed that you were going to talk about it, and I was very surprised.
You could probably trace this back through Nerd News, but I very rarely bring up second trailers.
Yeah.
Because typically it doesn't add much. Like, I mean, what do I say? Like, yeah, it still looks good and I'm still excited for it. I mean, it's not a first look at it. So
yeah, I know that a lot of people were freaking out about it, that it looked awesome. My wife watched it and she doesn't even like keep track of trailers. Like, that's not something that she does. And so she watched it and she was like, man, you need to watch this trailer. I was like, nope, I am good. Like, I don't like watching second trailers. I mean, I will eventually watch it just because I see so many movies between now and September that I guarantee you one of the movies is probably going to be a horror movie, and they're probably going to show this trailer in front of it. So most likely I will eventually see this trailer in theaters, but I'm not going to like openly seek it out.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. We're only 2 months away from that movie, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it. It looks amazing. That first trailer was really cool. So
yeah,
I'm definitely excited for this movie.
Cool. So that being said, Now the main event of nerd news. So,
Oh no, you're not going to bring up this thing? No, I'm just kidding. I don't have anything else.
no, I mean, I did want to preface it. Like, there was other stuff announced at Comic-Con this weekend. Like, I guess a big story was Brandon Routh is going to be Superman again on one of those CW shows. But nerd news is definitely biased into things that Pat and I like. So
For sure, and
we're going to keep
it's
it
kind
that
of
way.
like E3. Like when I was going through E3 stuff to talk about, it's tough because there's so much that gets announced, but I'm only going to pick the stuff that I give a shit about. So it's kind of the same thing. Like you have to parse through all of this stuff that gets announced. And if we don't care about it, then we're obviously not going to bring it up because that's not going to be much of a conversation.
Correct. And chances are, if you listen to our podcast, you probably have similar interests
100%.
to us. So, anyways, Marvel. So, Kevin Feige was in Hall H last night. We were recording on Sunday morning, so this is pretty fresh. But he announced what he's calling Phase 4, which just runs through 2021. And then he also teased some stuff that will happen beyond 2021. So I plan to just kind of go through property by property that they announced. And some of it's stuff that we've talked about on the podcast before, and some of it is new and a surprise. So the first up is the Black Widow movie, which is coming out May 1st, 2020. So next May, Scarlett Johansson, David Harbour, Florence Pugh, Rachel Weisz, a few other people. It seems to take place after Captain America Civil War. And yeah.
So the biggest thing for me is when will this movie be based? Like obviously things happen in Avengers Endgame that I still don't know. I'm sure people listening right now have seen this. Like you said, if you're listening to this, you probably have similar tastes and you probably have seen Endgame at least once, but I won't spoil it just in case somebody's out there that hasn't watched it. But there's things that happen in that movie that are going to stop her from being in future movies, essentially. So I was very curious to see how they were going to do that. She finally gets her own solo movie that people have been clamoring for years now, and it happens to come out after what happened in Endgame. So they kind of backed themselves into a corner there. But I'm excited. I mean, I think she's a super interesting character. I love David Harbour, so I'm psyched that he's in this movie as well. So there's not been a ton of information about who he's going to be in this movie. There's been some rumors, and I think some things have been confirmed from Comic-Con. Like they kind of hinted at who he was going to be. But yeah, I'm super psyched for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited too. I think it's interesting because prequels to me don't always carry much weight.
Sure.
Because we know what happens to Black Widow after this movie finishes up and you get into Infinity War and Endgame. So I'm curious to see if there's any twist thrown in there with the timeline to make it carry a little bit more weight. So we'll see. But
for sure.
Next up next year is The Eternals, which is a movie that had been rumored coming out November 6th, 2020. Stars Angelina Jolie, Richard Madden, Kumail Nanjiani, Lauren Ridloff, Brian Tyree Henry, Salma Hayek, a few other people that are more so, I think, up-and-comers. It also... So, I mean, I think I may have mentioned Lauren Ridloff. She's a deaf actor playing a deaf character, which is a first for the MCU. So, I'm not super familiar with, Jack Kirby's The Eternals, but obviously it's about as cosmic as you can get, from what I understand. So, I'm excited, and it should add a new layer to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is cool.
100%. And there's going to be another thing that you're going to talk about here in a little bit that I also am not super familiar with the character or characters. So I'm actually really excited for these two things because, not to sound super pretentious, but I mean, we talk about these characters so much and we know so much about the characters from the comic books and past movies and whatnot, that it's really refreshing to go into a property in the MCU that I don't really know a whole lot about. So
yeah,
I'm super excited. Like I get to go in with a completely clean slate. And so I'm going to try to do that. Obviously, I'm going to watch the trailers and stuff like that. But I'm really excited about the cast of this particular movie. And I like going into things fresh. And I don't get to do that with pretty much all of the MCU.
Yeah, absolutely. So next up is going to be fall of 2020, sometime around the Eternals. We'll get on Disney Plus, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So, of course, this is a series. Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan are coming back, and then Daniel Bruhl is coming back as Baron Zemo, his character from Civil War. I guess there was a video shown where he says, "I'll see you soon," and he puts on the mask that the comic character is known for. So, pretty exciting, but also something that we've talked about because it was announced a few months ago.
So when is this going to be based? Because why would they call it Falcon and Winter Soldier if he's Captain America now?
There's no way they don't do it with him as the new Captain America.
You would think so, like, because people are clamoring to find out how that's going to work. And so I just don't know how you could do it without it. But at the same time, why call it Falcon and Winter Soldier if he's Captain America? Maybe it's just so they don't feel like they're like doing a bait and switch. If you call it Captain America, some people are going to assume Chris Evans is in it.
Yeah, apparently Anthony Mackie came out on stage with Captain America's shield, and he kept trading it back and forth with Sebastian Stan as a bit of joke for fans, because obviously we know that both characters have been Captain America in the comics. So there's I guarantee that that's what they're playing off of is, I mean, yeah, he gave the shield to Falcon, but I'm sure there's some resentment and jealousy from Bucky's side of things. So I hope that they play off that.
Oh yeah, 100%. And they were frenemies, I guess, in Civil War. So I was excited for this show because I think they have an interesting dynamic and rapport with each other. So, I mean, a little bit of that has changed since Endgame, obviously, because you have that scene with Chris Evans and the Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan. So I think that changes their rapport a little bit. They're definitely more friends than frenemies at this point. But yeah, I'm definitely excited for this show.
Yeah. So on to the next property coming out. So February 12th, 2021, we are going to get Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So I think this is the one that I'm most excited about from a standpoint of not knowing much about the character. It stars, I'm going to fuck up these names because I have not heard them pronounced yet, but Simu Liu, I'm assuming, is playing Shang-Chi. Awkwafina is going to be there. And then Tony Leung, who I believe is playing the Mandarin. So the leader of the Ten Rings, the real Mandarin, not the one played by Ben Kingsley in Iron Man 3. So super exciting because you get a new character, but also something that's been teased for a long time. I mean, the Ten Rings were teased in Iron Man 1. So this is kind of, that storyline coming to fruition. So I'm definitely pumped for that.
Yeah, and this was the other one that I was kind of hinting at when we were talking about the Eternals. This is the other property that they announced that I don't know anything about, pretty much, other than the Ten Rings and the Mandarin and all that stuff that you laid out. I don't really know a whole lot about this particular character. And again, I'm going to watch the trailers, but I'm not going to do what I used to do. Like, when I used to watch these movies, if I didn't know that much about a character when I was like in college or whatever, I tried to like read up so I'd be the nerd that knew everything. But I would rather go the opposite route now, where I want to be surprised. I want to sit in the theater and not know what was going to happen. So, or at least have an idea what was going to happen. And so I'm super excited for these movies.
Awesome. So spring of 2021, after the release of Shang-Chi, we get another show on Disney Plus, and that is a show that was previously announced called WandaVision, which is bringing in Elizabeth Olsen as a Scarlet Witch, Paul Bettany as Vision, and Teyana Paris is in it as well. So what's interesting is she's playing the grown-up version of the daughter in Captain Marvel. So the little girl that Brie Larson interacts with, her friend's daughter. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting that they're bringing that character into things. And then this show apparently is also going to tie directly into a movie that they also announced that we'll get to here in a second. But yeah, WandaVision's coming back. Or out, I guess.
So this is the one that I don't particularly care that much about. I was never a huge fan of Scarlet Witch. Like she's a bigger property in the comic books, but in the MCU, I wasn't a huge fan of her, the way that they did the character, and I just don't think she's super important in some of these movies. Vision is an okay character as well. He's done a little bit differently in the comics, so this is a show that I will watch, of course, because I'm going to watch all of this stuff. But yeah, I'm just not super excited about it.
Yeah, I think for me, Vision's an okay character, but he's not charismatic. Like he's literally
for sure
a robot or an android. And Scarlet Witch, as much as I like Elizabeth Olsen's portrayal of her, I don't think she's a strong enough character to carry a show. So there's just not much charisma, it sounds like, around this show. So I'm interested to see what they do here. So right after WandaVision in Spring 21, we also get the Loki Disney Plus TV show in spring of 2021 with Tom Hiddleston coming back. So I don't know if they confirmed it or not, but the assumption is that it's going to follow the Loki that stole the Tesseract in Endgame from the 2012 timeline. So yeah, we'll see how that shapes up, but it's also a show that we've talked about a few times.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think the first time that we talked about it was, or maybe it was the second time we talked about it, we talked about how he basically is a trickster that kind of jumps around history, like our history, and kind of fucks with people. And so I think that if that's the show, I think that's super interesting. And obviously it ties in to what happens, like you said, in the 2020, or I almost fucking did it, the 2012 timeline. And it's also kind of gets it, not that Endgame and Infinity War didn't already do this, but the MCU, as much as you can be grounded, feels like they try to take these characters and kind of ground them a little bit. And Infinity War and Endgame kind of made it more comic booky. And so I definitely think this show, with him being able to jump around with the Tesseract, kind of makes it a little bit, it muddies the waters a little bit as far as the timeline's concerned. And so I think it kind of gets it a little bit closer to the comic book. So in little ways, I'm happy about that, because I love the comic books. They can be two different things, and I can appreciate them for being two different things, but I still kind of want my comic books in these movies. And so I'm excited for this show for sure. And I think that he does just an amazing job with the character.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads into the summer, I guess, of 2021. So May 7th, to be exact, we get another film, and it's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So Scott Derrickson from the original movie and from Sinister is coming back to direct. Obviously, Benedict Cumberbatch will be coming back. And then I kind of teased that WandaVision was going to play into an upcoming movie, and this is the movie that is playing into. So apparently those two movies or those two properties are the show and the movie are linked in some way, because Elizabeth Olsen is coming back as the Scarlet Witch in this movie. And they're also saying that this is the MCU's first scary film. So
interesting.
I'm excited for it. I wasn't the biggest fan of the first Doctor Strange. I mean, it did what it needed to and building the cinematic universe, and it told a somewhat interesting story, but it's far from, my favorite of those movies. But I think that this has a lot of promise, especially with the idea of this potentially being scary. And obviously multiverse is in the title of the movie. So I'm curious to see how they play with the events of Endgame with these characters.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you about Doctor Strange. It's not the best one. It's kind of a weird character to do, but he plays an important role in the rest of the MCU. And it's I kind of almost equate him to Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, kind of expanded the Marvel Cinematic Universe to the cosmic level. And then Doctor Strange kind of expanded it to, I don't know if supernatural is the best way, but like the magical part of the MCU.
Yeah.
Like, it expanded this universe. And so it was very important. The film itself, I mean, I usually rewatch all of these movies once a year, and that's one that I don't necessarily like not look forward to it like I do with The Dark World or Incredible Hulk or something like that, but it's definitely one of the low points for me, especially upon future viewings.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. So after Doctor Strange, we get the animated show that we talked about a couple months ago, What If? So, again, this is an animated show. It's going to be on Disney Plus. It just follows some what if storylines that could have happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Jeffrey Wright will be the voice of the Watcher. And I guess one of the things that's pretty cool is that over 25 actors from the Marvel Cinematic Universe are coming back to reprise characters' voices for this show. So again, that will be on Disney Plus summer 2021.
Yeah, again, what I was saying earlier about the Loki show kind of making it more comic booky. Obviously, this is not really the MCU per se, it's animated, but anything that kind of brings this universe into more the comic book realm, I'm excited for. And what if comics are very popular, so I'm pretty excited for this. And I think that they can just have fun with it because it's a what if story, so it's not going to affect the timeline of the MCU. So I feel like people could have some really, really cool stories and could have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's definitely, I think, a sleeper. Like, I think that it might fall under the radar because it's animated, but I'm sure there's some cool stuff that they can do there. So fall of 2021, we get a Hawkeye show on Disney Plus. So Jeremy Renner's coming back, and the show will also be introducing Kate Bishop, who is an iteration of Hawkeye. I think that she's in the Young Avengers. So apparently she's a fan favorite. I don't know a ton about her, but we'll see that show in the fall, where I'm assuming Hawkeye will kind of pass the mantle on and Jeremy Renner will ride off into the sunset. So yeah, I mean, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not excited for this show at all. It's definitely the one that I was just like, I'm sure there's a fan base out there. I know that people get really upset when he's like not in trailers or on posters or stuff like that. But I think that's just the internet being funny. And I do enjoy some of that stuff. But at the same time, he's the least interesting character. I think they made him a little bit more interesting in Endgame, which I appreciated. But for me, this is the show that nobody asked for.
Sure. I mean, obviously we'll watch it. I'm sure we'll review it, but
100%.
Yeah, that comes out fall of 2021, and followed by that on November 5th, 2021, we get Thor: Love and Thunder. So it was announced earlier this week that Taika Waititi was coming back, but if that wasn't enough, they pretty much blew their load last night at Comic-Con talking about what this movie is going to be. So not only do you have Chris Hemsworth, Tessa Thompson coming back to Thor, and you would assume Korg is coming back too with Taika Waititi being involved, you also have Natalie Portman returning to the fold. She came out holding Mjolnir because she is going to play the Jane Foster version of Thor in this movie. So I talked about the Mighty Thor, where Jane Foster takes over the mantle in the comic books quite a bit whenever that series was going on, back when we did our comic segment and back whenever I read more comic books, and I was a huge fan of it. So I'm pretty fucking pumped, man. I thought that was brilliant, and I think it's exciting that Natalie Portman's not only coming back, but she's getting to come back as a superheroine, especially after what Thor went through in Endgame. I think it's cool that she kind of gets to take over the mantle, and I'm curious to see what Taika does with it. So I'm obviously very excited for this movie.
Yeah, I'm excited for multiple reasons. I think Natalie Portman, of course, is a great actress. I know that she's kind of been on the record as saying that she didn't particularly like doing the Thor movies, and so I'm surprised that she came back. Maybe Ragnarok convinced her that the Thor movies could be better than they were the first two movies. So she kind of was in the MCU in the worst two movies that she could possibly be in. So maybe just seeing that movie maybe changed her mind. Also, they could have just backed up a truckload of fucking money, as we like to say. That may have changed her mind as well. But I know that you talked about the Mighty Thor, and you were very, very positive when you talked about that. I never read that comic, but I did read The Unworthy Thor, which doesn't really go with what happens in Endgame, him still being worthy. But I'm curious to see if they kind of go that route once she takes up the mantle. Maybe he becomes unworthy for some reason, and that I thought that was a very interesting dynamic in that comic. So I'm super, super excited for this. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, the only thing that bums me out a little bit is that this movie is coming out before we get Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So Thor going off with the Guardians at the end of Endgame won't be touched on, which is disappointing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So Kevin Feige kind of wrapped up his panel with saying, like, that's just a teaser for the next, 2.5 years. Like, I didn't even get into Black Panther 2, Captain Marvel 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the Fantastic Four movie we're making, and he also mentions mutants. And then he also brings out Mahershala Ali and announces that he's playing Blade in an upcoming Blade movie that doesn't have a release date yet. So he whipped his dick out with all of these announcements, and then he whipped his dick out again, basically saying, look at all this other shit that's going to come after 2021. So definitely a lot to unpack, but obviously it's awesome that all of those movies are getting sequels. So Black Panther, Captain America, Guardians, we're getting a Fantastic Four film that will hopefully finally be a good Fantastic Four film. And then I am so pumped about Blade. I think that Mahershala Ali is like the perfect casting, and it'd be cool to see how they bring that into the MCU, whether they'll go with vampires or they'll do something else. But I'm pretty fucking excited.
Yeah, so the Blade thing is obviously the biggest, I think, from all of the things that you just listed. For me, I love that they're bringing the Fantastic Four in. But I mean, we kind of already knew that was going to happen eventually. And he kind of like passive aggressively mentions mutants. So that's obviously pretty exciting as well. But I had no idea. I mean, there's been rumors that they might bring Blade back into the MCU. But Ali playing that character is just such a cool casting. I will say that it does make me believe that the Netflix MCU shows are pretty much dead, because if they bring those characters in, that means that the same character that played Cottonmouth is also Blade. So that muddies the waters a little bit. So I feel like them casting him kind of basically confirms in a way that they don't have any plans on bringing those characters into the MCU officially.
Yeah, and I'm fine with those shows being dead. I'm not fine with those characters being dead. So I hope it, somewhere down the line they get reintroduced. But that's a good point. I forgot he was in Luke Cage. So yeah, for sure. Those shows are just non-existent in the MCU at this point. So I don't know, man. That's all I have for nerd news. But obviously, it was a lot. And there's a lot to be excited about. It's still a good time to be a nerd even after Endgame.
100%. And it's very rare that we have so much nerd news that nerd news is kind of its own topic. Well, I mean, it's always its own segment, but it's going to be longer than our main topic, I'd assume, considering what we're reviewing this particular week. So let's just dive right into it. We're already like an hour and 15 minutes into this episode. So we are going to be reviewing the Lion King live action adaptation that got released on Friday. It was directed by Jon Favreau, which we've already talked about him a little bit already when Tyler talked about the Chef Show for what he was into. Normally, at this point, I would give a synopsis, but we're already kind of going long, and who's fucking listening to this episode and doesn't know what The Lion King's about? So I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. I didn't actually realize how excited I was for this movie until I got closer to it. I recently just got accepted into like this leadership academy at work, and so we had our first meeting the other day, and so we had to like go around and like introduce each other. And of course I kind of gave the generic like, hey, I'm a big movie buff, but as soon as I said that, I was like, I go see a couple of movies a week in theaters, and I'm going to see The Lion King tomorrow, and I'm super excited. Like, I didn't plan on saying that. That kind of like just leaked out of me, and so everybody kind of just laughed when I said that, and I just didn't realize how excited I was for this movie. Lion King is a huge deal to me. It's the first movie that I remember seeing in theaters. I remember my mom taking us to go see that movie, and me and my mom going to see movies together was always a big deal for me. That was kind of like the reason, I mean, other than the fact that she was my mom, that was kind of like the bond that we had together. And so I just kept thinking about her as I was watching this movie. So I didn't realize how big of a deal this movie was to me until I kind of got closer to seeing the remake.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I wish I had some kind of like really emotional investment that I could go back to, but I just really liked this movie when I was a kid. quite a bit. And Lion King is, I mean, it's great. It's a great fucking movie, man.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was excited for this movie because obviously Jon Favreau was doing it, and I loved The Jungle Book. I thought The Jungle Book was so good. You can go back and listen to us review that a few years ago. So,
but don't go listen to our first Rotten Tomatoes film draft where I trashed The Jungle Book.
Yeah, so I was excited, man. I definitely was, and we're going to get into it. But as the movie started, I will say that I had a bit of an emotional reaction too. Like they
For
do
sure.
the classic Disney intro instead of like the CGI castle, and then
Yeah.
it starts up with the fucking Circle of Life, and I don't know, it was a bit emotional, so I'm excited to get into it.
Did you rewatch the original before you went and saw this? Because my wife and I
No,
did.
I should have. I wish I would have.
Actually, I'm kind of wishing I hadn't, to be honest with you. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. That's going to play into my reaction to this film.
Correct.
So as we do for every review, we kind of just start off with a general overview, and then we'll get into more particulars as we go through this review. So this first segment we just call Broad Strokes. So how'd you feel about The Lion King?
So unfortunately, going into this movie, I was aware that this was not lighting up Rotten Tomatoes. It currently,
Sure.
So currently it has a lower review than Aladdin, which blew my mind. I thought there's no fucking way. And then the movie starts up, and like I said, I started to get a little bit emotional whenever the Circle of Life kicks in, and I'm like, maybe I'm just not like other critics, and this is going to do it for me because I'm such a big fan of Lion King, and I'm such a big Disney fan. And I'll say this movie is not bad, and when you strip it down to everything that, to just the story, it was never going to be bad if they didn't stray too much from the original plot of The Lion King. But I mean, it's not great either. This movie carries a lot less weight than the classically animated version, which is strange because you'd almost expect the opposite. I think when you make a realistic version of that story, you quickly find that there are really charming things about the classically animated version that happen because it's a cartoon, and this movie just can't hold up because real animals don't move and act the way that cartoon characters do, and that hurts it a little bit.
Yeah. So my first note for this review is this might actually be the hardest review that I think we've ever done, at least for me personally. Not because this movie is bad or boring or anything like that. We always talk about how it's really hard for us to review a movie that we just didn't feel emotionally invested into. Like if it's super boring, it's kind of hard for us to review it because we didn't really care about it. So it was kind of hard to pay attention to it. With this movie, we had that emotional attachment to it. So it's not hard in that sense. It's hard for me to sit here and describe how I feel about this movie after seeing it because it was so similar to one of my favorite movies of all time. So how can I sit here and say that I didn't like a movie that is basically the same movie that I love? It's so weird to have that feeling after I walk out of this movie that I was disappointed with this movie. But at the same time, it's like, why remake a movie if you're just gonna literally, this was almost a literal shot for shot remake of the original. And I've seen the original. I saw the original the day before we went and saw this movie. And so you already have this perfect movie. I mean, it's really such a good fucking movie and such a great story. There's almost nothing about the story that I have any issues with. And maybe that's a little bit of nostalgia talking, but I mean, I literally just watched the original a couple of days ago. And so if you're not going to take any chances with this remake, then why even make it? You just wanted to use this technology, and we'll get into how well the movie looked here in a little bit, but it just felt like you just really wanted just to remake it and be able to use this technology to remake this really good movie, but you didn't want to take any chances with it.
Yeah, I read somebody say Jon Favreau was too busy worrying about if he could. He never stopped to think if he should, which I think is
exactly
pretty accurate.
Going off of what I just said for Broad Strokes, this being the hardest review that I had to do, it was literally the hardest review as far as the story is concerned. Because, again, kind of going what I said off when I was going to give a synopsis is, who's listening to this that has never seen the fucking Lion King? Like, there's no reason for us to, like, break down the story beats of a movie that's almost exactly the same fucking movie. I mean, everybody knows that Mufasa dies. Everybody knows that Scar's the bad guy. So there's no reason to, like, go through and talk about all of that because, I mean, we're essentially reviewing a movie that came out 30 fucking years ago. So why do that? So what I wanted to do for the story segment is kind of talk about the few things that were different. There wasn't a ton that was different, so this is going to be a pretty quick story segment. And let's be honest, we're just being 100% honest right now. All of these story beats are a little thin because there wasn't a ton that was different, but I do want to kind of go through. And the first thing, and you already kind of hit on this, was the first thing that I noticed about this movie, and it kind of ties into what we're going to talk about later with the CGI, is the fact that they really wanted for this movie to kind of make it look like a nature documentary. Like, they really wanted the animals to be more like animals, like to act like animals. Because in the animated version, they are animals, obviously, but they act like people. And they do things that people do, like picking up things, like Scar. He flosses his teeth at one point. Like, animals don't fucking do that. And so I just thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's littered throughout the entire movie. It's a shot-for-shot remake, except for some of the cool stuff that happens in the 95 version. So yeah, that's where it falls flat for me. I don't think it makes sense that you have Scar floss his teeth in this movie, or the animals do things that humans do, but obviously you draw comparisons to the original whenever you do a remake, especially like this, and that's what makes the original stand taller, is that there's more weight to the characters because they're able to do more.
And they kind of had to change things here and there to make it more realistic, which I kind of found. I don't want to say that I was disappointed by it. It just kind of, like, because I watched the movie the night before, I was able to kind of pick out those instances where they changed some stuff here and there to so Scar doesn't pick up the fucking zebra leg when he's talking to the hyenas, because obviously he can't pick anything up because he doesn't have thumbs. So there's little things like that, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit, him and the hyenas, but it felt so weird watching this movie after watching the original the night before.
The worst place where that happens is every song. The songs are so vibrant in the original, and the characters are doing all these crazy things as they do these songs and they sing. And in this movie, you have the songs, and I think the songs are done pretty well, and I'll get into it a little bit later. But the characters aren't as vibrant as the songs are because they just can't be. They're fucking animals. Yeah. So it's different.
The biggest example, and that's a good point to bring up, is when he sings "I Can't Wait to Be King."
Totally.
And they have essentially a parade while he's doing it, and that's how they lose Zazu. They don't really get to do that in this movie because they have to act like animals. And so he loses him in kind of a similar way, but it's not the spectacle. Like in Aladdin, you brought up the Rotten Tomatoes score of Aladdin, like that parade initially, like when he comes back into the city, that is a spectacle in both of the movies. But in this movie, they couldn't do that.
Correct. Exactly. I mean, they littered the watering hole with all these animals, but you can throw all sorts of fucking animals in there. You can't make it to your point, the spectacle that it was in the original. And then you sit there and you watch it and you just feel off. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah. It just doesn't hit that note that the original does.
For sure.
All right. So like I mentioned with Scar and the hyenas, the one I guess is probably the biggest plot point in this movie, and it's not even that big. Like I said, most of these story beats that we're going to talk about are pretty thin because not a whole lot has changed from the original. But the fact that I was surprised that Scar wasn't like buddies with the hyenas prior to their big plot to kill Mufasa. Like that's a big deal. Like him coming into the elephant graveyard and not like them not knowing that he was coming, and him like trying to prove himself that he belongs there, and them not eat him was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a make or break change, but it's not a change I was totally into. I mean, I like the idea of Scar still being a king in the shadows with the hyenas. You know, he craves power, and he found it with them at some point in his life in the original movie. But in this movie, it's just this afterthought, and I don't understand why that's one of the few changes you make.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of, and this literally, I'll just go ahead into my next story beat, is the fact that they made one of the hyenas like the queen of the hyenas. And so I feel like that was the reason that they made Scar, like him having to go into the elephant graveyard and like introduce him, well, not necessarily introduce himself, but kind of like prove that his plan was going to work and that he was worthy and not to eat him. He's basically proving it to this other hyena that's kind of the leader of this group. And I feel like they made that change just so they could make this other change.
Yeah, I mean, and that decision, you know, to make Shinzi the queen of the hyenas, to me, it didn't carry any weight. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but
no, not at all.
I like my hyenas really dumb and funny. So you have a moment or two with Kamari and Azizi, played by Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre, but I feel like with Scar being this ultimate bad guy, you don't need Shinzi to be the leader of the pack and deathly serious. I think the charm of those characters in the original is that they're all dumb, which is part of the reason why they make bad choices and are exiled. And I don't get that feeling in this movie.
Yeah, I do appreciate that they took out Bob. Like, that character is weird. And in 2019, to have that same character in this movie would be a little bit interesting. Like, I think it would be an interesting choice. But, yeah, the hyenas just didn't hit that comic relief like they do in the original movie. There are like there's that scene where he like gets real close to the other one, and I thought that was kind of cute. Like, that had a moment where it was kind of funny, but for the most part, that like the hyenas in the original movie are comic relief, and they don't really work like that in this movie.
And you get Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre to play two of them, like two very known comedians, and then you just give them a moment or two where they riff off each other about personal space, and that's like the whole joke, which is not good.
Yeah, it's not great. So the last story beat, and again, there's almost nothing that's different. Like, I mean, we're making bigger deals out of like 2 or 3 minute scenes. Like, there's almost nothing to talk about if you don't talk about these little bits here and there, because, like I said, almost a shot-for-shot remake of the original. So the only other thing, and this was probably, I think, the biggest addition, just because it took the longest. And it's also like maybe the only piece that you can find out of the original that was necessarily missing, but I don't think it necessarily needed to be in it, is the fact that Nala leaves Pride Rock in the original to go find help, but you don't ever see her actually physically leaving. You just see the next scene where she chases Timon. Which one did she chase? I just fucking watched this movie.
Pumbaa.
Yeah, she chases. Yeah. Sorry about that. So you see that, and then she explains to Simba that she left Pride Rock because all of these things are bad, and Scar's king, and he's doing a terrible job, and all this other stuff. So she kind of brings everybody up to speed as she's bringing Simba up to speed. But in this movie, you actually see her leave. And as I was watching it, I was like, this is not necessary at all. Like, I feel like they only put it in there, A, to have something to add to it, and B, to add, like, maybe they felt like they needed to add some tension. And there are a little bit of tension. It's like a little stealth mission for Nala to like leave Pride Rock, but it just didn't hit for me at all.
No, man, you're exactly right. I mean, it was something for Beyonce to do, and it gave weight to a side character that's being played by this huge star. You know, Nala was pretty independent in the original movie, but never had much to do. So, you know, I'm glad she got the opportunity in this movie to step up, especially in Simba's absence, but it didn't add really anything to the movie. It just added more to that character.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Nala and Beyonce, that was pretty much all I had for story. So let's like jump right into performances.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of framed it around some of the songs. So I thought the voice acting was really good, but the problem is that the vibrance of these performances don't really seem right coming out of the realistic animals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, the animals don't have expressions, so this great voice acting kind of falls flat in spots. So, again, I said I kind of wanted to frame it around the songs. So, I Just Can't Wait to Be King. I thought that the kid actors in this movie were really good. They're really good singers. John Oliver was not good in that song.
No.
Not at all. Like, really bad, actually. Like, surprisingly so. But I thought that besides that, he was fine as Zazu. I was let down by Be Prepared because it's the only song in the movie they didn't do in full, which bummed me out because I really like that song. But apparently it has Nazi themes, which I never really connected the dots on. So that's why Disney...
Yeah, it gets real fucking weird.
Yeah, they didn't want to include it but I guess that was a moment that Jon Favreau asked for. So Chiwetel Ejiofor, he did fine as Scar. I don't think that...
his singing wasn't great.
Yeah.
It wasn't Russell Crowe bad in Les Miserables, which is like the thing that I bring up all the time. Like, he is the worst fucking singer in that musical. He wasn't that bad, but I mean, you could definitely tell that he had his limitations as a singer.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't want to compare these people to the actors that played them in the 95, but I mean, he doesn't hold a candle to Jeremy Irons, in my opinion. So, Hakuna Matata, I thought was really good. Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen were the best part of the movie, in my opinion. I think that they were
100%.
different enough from the original to feel fresh and funny in a different way, but they were also similar in personality and themes. So it was like the perfect balance, and it was probably the best balance of the original and the remake in the entire movie. Donald Glover was awesome. Especially in that song. Like, he's a really good singer, and obviously I know Childish Gambino, but I didn't know he had such pipes on him. And then Beyonce, of course, does a great job singing. I mean, that's what she's known for. So I'm sure I'm missing a couple people here and there. Obviously, James Earl Jones is James Earl Jones, so he was amazing. But overall, I think the voice acting was good. It just is more of a problem with animation.
It makes sense to cast Beyonce as Nala, because it's really the only female that sings in that movie. But, she only gets one song. You have fucking Beyonce, and you only give her one song. And it's my least favorite song in the fucking movie.
Didn't they do... It was so forgettable, but she has, a different song she does, right? Like a song they added?
No, she has, Do You Feel Love Tonight?
Yeah.
I thought it was Nala's only song. I mean, I guess she sings Can't Wait to Be King, but that's not her action. That's not Beyonce.
There's a song called Spirit that's in the movie.
I don't even fucking remember
that. I already forgot that and it's short, and she sings it at one point, but she has that song which they added, or maybe it was from the Lion King musical, I don't know. But then she's also, and Can You Feel the Love Tonight? So still though, you just at that point just make Nala this lion that loves to sing because you have Beyonce.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. I mean, you had the greatest singer of her generation, and you really only give her a song and a half.
I agree.
Yeah, John Oliver was probably the biggest disappointment for me because I thought his casting as Zazu was so pitch perfect.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because I like Last Week Tonight so much, we look forward to that show every week, that as soon as he started talking, I was like, that's John Oliver. And that's what I don't want to happen. So I was super excited for him, and then it ended up being a disappointment. I didn't really hear anybody else like I heard John Oliver. Seth Rogen a little bit, but his voice acting was really well done. And I thought that they added a few jokes here and there that really work well, like kind of meta jokes. Like when they're walking away from singing Hakuna Matata and Donald Glover is still singing, and they're kind of poking fun at him for singing it, and they kind of make a meta joke about how they've been singing this song for fucking 10 years or whatever it was. I thought that was pretty funny. They had some jokes in there that I thought were really great. So I thought everybody did a really good job.
Awesome, man.
All right, so the biggest part of this movie, I think the thing that people are going to talk the most about is, of course, the CGI.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've already touched on all my points through our other segments. I mean, they were just handicapped by what animals really do. I mean, the animation is beautiful. The fact that none of this is real is amazing. This is all computer generated. So I don't want to take away from the feat that is, and the fact that it took them so long to make this movie because it's so incredibly animated. So I definitely don't want to take away from the animators or the people that worked really hard on this movie, but the animation is also what makes this movie fall flat because, again, handicapped by what animals really can do. So definitely impressed by their talent, but unfortunately it didn't do the movie any service.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about how they were handicapped. They handicapped themselves, so they decided, they made the choice to make this look like a nature documentary. So therefore they can't do certain things because that's not what animals do. Well, you're the one that made that choice. You made this movie fall flat because you decided to handicap yourself. I will say that, I mean, the fact that it looks as good as it does is amazing. I will say, and I do point this out occasionally, so I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but their mouth moving, still not quite there. That was the only moment where I'm just like, this doesn't look real. Like, that was literally the only moment throughout these movies, or this movie, that I was like, that doesn't look real. But even then, there was a couple of moments where it still looked really, really good. So, I mean, I guess the technology is almost there.
Yeah.
But not quite there. I think it was mostly when Nala was talking. Like, her mouth, for some reason, just didn't look real to me. But I think it's obviously still got a little bit to go. But, I mean, this movie, the fact that none of it is fucking real. Like, to call this a live action adaptation is not really correct because it's still animated. It's still computer generated. So it's so amazing that it looks literally like a nature documentary.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right, so obviously there's not going to be a spoiler section because there's no need to spoil a movie that's exactly like a movie that came out like 20, 30-ish years ago. So we're just going to go ahead and put a star rating out of 5 stars. How'd you feel about The Lion King?
So just to preface this, my star rating is going to sound probably more positive than I did in my review, but that's just because at its heart, it's the same story, which is really good. But I want you to, so I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5, but I would give the original 95 version a 4.5 or potentially even a 5 out of 5. So I think whenever you compare it to that score, you can see how much this movie does fall short of the original.
Yeah, I checked into the original when I watched it the other night, and I think I might have given it 4. But now, kind of like talking through this movie, I realize how good it actually is compared to this movie. So I probably would give it 4.5 now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more. So my 3-star rating that I'm going to give this movie, it does seem a little harsh because it, again, kind of piggybacking off of what you just said, it's still essentially, when you break it down, the same exact movie. We did talk about how a lot of it seems like, just by going off of our review, a lot of it did change, but those are such small parts of the movie. Overall, this is the exact same movie. When you really think about it, it's essentially the exact same movie. So I'm taking a movie that I would give 4.5 and bumping it down to 3. That's mostly because of how disappointed I was coming out of this movie. That I felt kind of bored because I just watched this movie just the other day, and for me that was why, like, I felt, not that I didn't like this movie, it was just, again, I just felt disappointed. I will probably own this movie, probably only get it digitally. I probably won't buy a physical copy, and then we'll see if I still feel disappointed after I watch it. Maybe just kind of a little bit of time in between would probably help this movie a little bit, but like, judging it against one of my favorite movies of all time, literally the night before, definitely hindered how I felt about this movie.
Totally agree.
All right, so we are going to end this episode, as we always do, with a nerd favorite. It is Tyler's turn. The topic changes from episode to episode. It is his week to pick the topic. So what is nerd favorite this week?
First off, let's face it, nobody's listening anymore because we are an hour and 40 minutes into this episode. So it doesn't matter what nerd favorite is. But for those of you that did still stick around, I'm going to kind of stick with our nerd news segment and go off of the Top Gun trailer and do a pretty straightforward nerd favorite and just ask you what your favorite Tom Cruise movie is, because I legitimately don't know. So I'll go first. Tom Cruise definitely has a really good filmography, but I would say that there are more movies on there that are kind of gaps for me than I realized. Top Gun being one of those. So I am a bit limited in my selections. Obviously, most of the Mission Impossible movies are really great, but I think that I'm going to go with Edge of Tomorrow. I just thought that was a really solid sci-fi movie, and he had great charisma with Emily Blunt. I thought that it was an interesting story that kind of played on some tropes that we know, but did enough stuff with originality that it was a really fun movie to watch. So I think that's probably one of the better sci-fi movies in the last decade, and I would definitely say that's my favorite of his films.
Yeah, it's definitely my favorite as well. And I was going to disqualify your nerd favorite if you called it Live, Die, Repeat, because that's not the fucking title of the movie, as much as they want it to be the title of the movie. But yeah, for sake of conversation, I will pick a different movie. He does a lot of time travel movies, like good time travel movies, because he has Edge of Tomorrow and Minority Report are both really good, and they're kind of time travel-y movies, if you think about it. So Minority Report wouldn't be my next choice, but it is a good one. I'm really torn between The Last Samurai, which a movie that I really liked when it first came out. I know that people shit on it because it's called The Last Samurai and Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise, but if you actually watch the movie, it makes a lot of sense why it's called that and why Tom Cruise is in this movie. But I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so I don't know if that would be necessarily my choice, but I am really into those like Jet Li. I talked about this, I think, last week with the Mulan trailer. Like, I really enjoyed like Hero and Fearless, those types of movies. And so The Last Samurai, I definitely put it into that category. It is very, very good. Jerry Maguire is also really good. I don't know. I mean, it kind of gets shit on because it's a rom-com, but I am a big sports fan, so that's a good one. So he does have a lot of movies that are very interesting. Of course, he does the Mission Impossible movies, but then he does have a lot of stinkers as well. So my choice for, and I'm really having a hard time with this, but I think ultimately would be A Few Good Men. I think is his best movie. He plays just like, I wouldn't say necessarily a John McClane type of character, but like that same kind of like charisma, good guy, but he's kind of a bad boy at the same time. Like, he doesn't really follow the rules, and he's very sarcastic and funny. And I really like him and Demi Moore's chemistry in that movie. And then of course they have that famous scene in there where you can't handle the truth and all that good stuff. So I know a lot of people remember that movie for that particular scene, but the whole movie is great. Aaron Sorkin wrote it, so of course the dialogue's going to be great. So really good movie. I think that it would definitely be my second favorite Tom Cruise movie, because like I said, Edge of Tomorrow would be my pick as well.
Awesome, man.
All right, so that is it for episode 249. And normally we do all of our like intro stuff, but since really probably our parents are the only ones still listening, just do all the things that I said at the very beginning if you haven't already, Mom or Dad, I guess in my case. I don't know why I set us off on such a weird note, but yeah, so for Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
we are the nerds you're looking for. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.